of Heavy Rain. And we are going to be talking about the game and its overall interest and reception once the game came out. So it's an interactive drama, an action-adventure game. It was developed by Quantic Dream, one of the best adventure game developers, and consequently it was published by Sony Computer Entertainment as a PlayStation 3 exclusive, and that was in February of 2010. The game features 4 protagonists involved with the mystery of the Origami Killer, a serial murderer who uses extended periods of rainfall to drown his victims. The player interacts with the game by performing actions which are highlighted on screen and related to motions on the controller, and in some cases performing a series of quick-time events. The player's decisions and actions during the game will affect the narrative. The main characters can be killed, and certain actions may lead to alternative scenes and endings. In short, it is very important how you play this game. It does have some problems with some of the controls, particularly during the action sequences, but overall, once you've played it a few times, you'll get to know what you need to do, and then you'll master it. You'll be able to race through certain parts of the game. It's very important that you learn the controls right from the beginning, and there's like a brief tutorial right once you're in the game. If you do something wrong, it will definitely affect the outcome. This game allegedly has 17 different endings, and if you are not performing appropriately during the action sequences, some of the lead characters might get killed, and then in addition to that, you will be directed to different outcome right at the end. Some are very happy and positive, and the other ones are not really as jolly, as you will see. So coming back to the game, the game developer David Cage is the person who wrote the script of 2,000 pages, and he acted as director for the 4 years of development, traveled to Philadelphia to research the settings, and he intended to improve basically upon what was flawed in his previous game Fahrenheit. I mean, some of you might remember Fahrenheit was released on Xbox a little while back, and there was some criticism of the game, particularly during some of the sequences which appeared to be a bit flat. In this instance, he was really polishing up everything he considered to be on the downside, and as you will see, the Heavy Rain product looks absolutely astonishing with high quality graphics, incredible sound, and overall the atmosphere previously unseen in the computer game world when it came to kind of film noir settings. And the game's reminiscent of those very dark and deadly films of the 1940s and the 50s. So principally, after working on the script, he contacted the composer Norman Cobell, and Cobell, I believe who worked with him previously, agreed to write a score, which was then recorded at Abbey Road Studios. Heavy Rain was a critical and commercial success, winning 3 BAFTA awards and selling over 5 million copies, so it massively exceeded his previous projects. It did receive praise for its emotional impact, visuals, writing, controls, voice acting, and music. Some players and critics did find problems with controls, and the controls were, well, they were easy to find, easy to detect, but when you're playing it in real time, sometimes during the game you have to really perform fast, and in some instances you have to be engaging with 3 separate buttons, and on the PlayStation controller this could be a bit tricky. So it's worth remembering that doing a proper tutorial at the beginning, and maybe replaying the game a few times, will provide you with the adequate skill. The criticism was directed towards that, and I think some of the characters got killed early, and therefore the outcome wasn't as expected right at the end. Recently, a PlayStation 4 version, which was fully remastered and polished up, has been released as a standalone title, and also in the Quantic Dream collection, together with Beyond Two Souls, another very exciting adventure game. And this was released in March of 2016. So let's have a look at some of the visuals, and we'll look closer at the way they made the game. Drama and action adventure game in which the player controls 4 different characters from a third-person perspective. So it's very important that you really get to know your character, because each one of them is very important in terms of its narrative and just the way all the characters interact during the game. You probably will have one of your favorites, and you will not particularly like the other 2. But nevertheless, once in the game, you will be able to play all of them at the same time, during the game, and you will find that some of them will have a kind of major impact on how the game ends. Each playable character may die at any time, depending on the player's actions, and that will create a branching storyline. In these cases, the player is faced with quick time events, and the game is divided into multiple scenes, so each will be centering on one of the characters. Holding down R2 moves, the character forward and the left analog stick controls the direction, and interaction with the environment is done by pressing on-screen context-sensitive prompts, using the right analog stick, and also performing various control movements with the DualShock 3 or 4. Also, what you'll find is Heavy Rain has various difficulty levels, and what's particularly good is that you can change the difficulty levels as you carry on throughout the game. So it doesn't really depend on, let's say, the lack of skill right at the beginning. With PlayStation Move, the player also wields either the motion and navigation controllers, or the DualShock and motion controllers. Altogether, it does provide us with a variety of different options in order for us to fully immerse. We could talk a bit about the plot, but I would rather keep everyone in suspense, because as you replay the game 2 or 3 times, you will discover that the characters will be pursuing a different route, and depending on what they do, they will lead the investigation towards the end with a successful, or particularly in some cases unsuccessful, type of ending. So how did this game materialize? It was a project that David Cage worked on for quite a few years, evidently after having Fahrenheit as a very successful game in the last decade. He wanted to have a proper follow-up that was going to elevate his company to the upper echelons of the adventure game makers. And this did happen, although with some considerable difficulty at the beginning. The game is a bit controversial in its content, and there were some difficulties with the original involvement with various developers, as you will see. So, as we said, it was Sony Electronics that released the game at the end and embraced it as their own proprietary game, exclusively released on PlayStation 3. But initially, the game was pitched to Microsoft, and it got rejected for its themes of child abduction, which is obviously extremely sensitive. The game is at times quite violent and brutal, and there are some parts which some of the viewers may consider a bit bizarre. However, they did tone down some of that, and eventually they got a considerable interest from Sony. And at E3 in 2006, they revealed a particularly enhanced type of technology which they were using for casting, and that seemed quite extraordinary, during the event. And the guys from Sony really jumped on that and basically embraced the game in full. This technology was created in less than 3 months, and it was including the game engine, script casting, motion capture, and R&D. So although the demonstration was not intended for the public eye, it made really a massive appearance at Sony's behest, and the executives were really quite keen on using this as their own engine. And the director was particularly impressed with the actresses involved, so therefore writer and director David Cage gave Aurielle Bonchillon the part of Lauren Winter, and her character is quite crucial in the course of this game. So just bear with us a second. Once the project took off, it was massive, and to call it massive is simply an understatement. First of all, it did take 4 years to make, which obviously was very considerable. And it had a development, marketing and distribution budget of about 40 million euros for a page which was for a project which was 2,000 page long script. Heavy Rain required 170 days of shooting and more than 70 actors and stuntmen, 60 additional days to animate the faces of 50 actors. So as you could see, it was a major project, and it also had 60 sets and over 30,000 animations. Guillaume de Fundamier, who is the CFO of Quantic Dream, claimed it was one of the most ambitious motion capture projects for a game yet. And I think personally I would agree with him. Once you play the game, you'll realize how incredibly atmospheric it is, how many graphic designers were spending time just building the atmosphere of film noir and paying a lot of attention to the detail. So, definitely worth considering once playing the game. The beginning of the game was inspired by an incident where David Cage briefly lost his son in a shopping mall, and this made him reflect on what it means to love your son. And you will see that this led to the tagline, "How far are you prepared to go to save someone you love?" And it's the tagline that keeps persisting throughout the game. Cage structured the game like a film and wanted to solve the frustration he had with the game over message by allowing the story to continue after the death of a playable character. So again, frequently in the games where you get killed off, the game ends. But in this instance, you have quite a few characters who can get killed as you obviously carry on with the game, and the game doesn't end. You keep playing it again and again, and you get to the different ending, which is particularly exciting for this type of game. And considering the quality graphics and the atmosphere, excellent narrative, rather complicated plot with lots of different characters, you will never get bored. Principally, you can play it again and again. Every time you discover something new, and you'll find it both exciting and at times quite shocking and horrifying. So each character was made to look like the actor counterpart, and if you are playing the special edition, you'll be able to get this on bonus section. There you have additions, and you'll be able to see exactly how they really blended the appearance of those actors with their game characters. Madison Page character was very popular in the game, was modeled after Jackie Ainsley, who was offered body motion capture and her likeness, while Judy Beecher provided the voice and facial motion capture. To keep the game far from being boring, all the scenes were intentionally short. And you see, this is a very important point when you're comparing this game with his former project of Fahrenheit. People did complain, the players, that at times Fahrenheit appeared to be a bit flat, just the way the scenes were shot and put together. So in this instance, you will have a very snappy scenario where lots of different sequences are blending at all times, and you really become a bit rattled with the anxiety those characters are feeling, which really is exposed and, I guess, elevated by this style of editing. So absolutely, thumbs up and 10 out of 10 for the way they've really made it visually. The user interface was done with Amiga Game Menus Master, and you'll find it really very easy to use throughout the game. The first design for Heavy Rain was a makeshift motion picture controller, and then it didn't seem to really work out as expected, so they discarded the idea. Also, towards the end of their development, they introduced different difficulty levels, which were implemented to appeal to a broader sample of players. So principally, people not quite skilled in the use of the PlayStation controller, they were given different options. And what's particularly good is that you can change difficulty level as you're progressing in the game. So let's say you start on an easy level, and then later in the game, where you're more skilled, you just up it to the advanced. Works out perfectly. It doesn't really affect the narrative, but it will affect the way you'll be able to master the controls. So, all good, and definitely very much of interest, to anyone who is a veteran of adventure and adventure games. So, in addition to what I already described, David Cage really wanted to continue with the interactive storytelling and also rectify the flaws of Fahrenheit. That the game is set in a nameless city, which is really very dark and deadly. He conducted a rather thorough field research in Philadelphia, also hired a location scout who worked on the film of the same name. You will recall the film called Philadelphia, which was also having beautiful visuals. Asking to be escorted to the poor areas where you could speak to the locals, take pictures, and then shoot a lot of film. So the extraordinary visuals in this game really are indebted to this type of research and a lot of filming in kind of desolate areas of Philadelphia, and you will get very quickly the idea of rather kind of a failing industrial southern landscape, which is just full of factories and the images which indicate that everything is going downhill. He was also struck by the despondency he found there and incorporated the presence of large factories near houses into the game. You will find that to be of particular interest later in the game, where you discover those two brothers who are living in a trailer with an alcoholic father next to the factory, which is completely disused. It's really a very, very good section of the game. And his inspiration really included art of many kinds, but came mostly from real life. And he did incorporate some of his own experiences of growing up into the storyline. So in addition to that, because obviously Origami Killer is a very serious criminal, he's a murderer who's abducting and killing children, Cage researched serial killers by reading books, deciding on which modus operandi and background the Origami Killer would or could have. And that really blends in perfectly. For anybody who watched Silence of the Lambs, anyone who was, they will get the atmosphere and they will get the MO, which is somewhat similar and very well researched, particularly through the FBI books written by John Douglas and Robert Ressler. Norman Cobail, who previously worked with Cage and Fahrenheit, was chosen as the composer for Heavy Rain, and he was given 2 months from 5th of June 2009 to do everything. So considering that they were making this game for 4 years and he was given 2 months, I mean, you could just well imagine what pressure he was under. But Cobail was instructed by the director on the importance of representing the characters' points of view. And that's very important in this game. You will find that the music is perfectly blending with the lead character's mindset, leading him to employ the piano for Ethan Mars, a chamber orchestra for Madison Page, and a symphony orchestra for Norman Jayden. Also brass and flutes for Scott Shelby. So you could see employing different instruments or different sections of the orchestra for separate characters did provide him with a perfect sound for, you could say, a very different mindset that each character was carrying throughout the game. They recorded it at Abbey Road Studios, and the composer delivered nearly 300 cues, which were all in the final product. And he also played the piano himself, so he became literally an integral part of this game. So after 4 years of making, and many difficulties which they faced with both the developers and people who worked on the set, Heavy Rain was embraced by Sony and then released as a PlayStation 3 exclusive, and following its development for Xbox 360 and PC in 2006. Having first been scheduled for late 2008 release, it was delayed to 23rd of February of 2010 in North America, and then consequently released in Europe, Australia and New Zealand. Also on 26th of February of 2006, we had it in the United Kingdom and Ireland. Leading up to the release was an internet-based incredible viral marketing campaign that also involved people in finding 4 pieces of evidence concerning a serial killer, and in the end being rewarded the game demo well before it was released on 11th of February. So if you look at it, it was a brilliant, well-construed, well-conceived marketing campaign. You were already, prior to entering the game or purchasing it, trying to get the evidence, and then you were rewarded by a demo. And that worked out perfectly. The marketing campaign generated a lot of interest, and a lot of people then eventually bought the game. Heavy Rain Edition Modifié was a modified version released in France in 2011, and it was toned down quite sizably and quite considerably. The reason for which was they really wanted a wider audience, to be fully involved. So they also announced later that a remastered version of Heavy Rain would be released on PlayStation 4, and I'm pleased to say that this is the version that we are going to be playing and watching here on my gaming channel. And again, it was to be released as the PlayStation exclusive, released on 1st of March of 2016 in North America via PlayStation Network, and then they followed up by physical versions on 2nd of March of 2016 in Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and then eventually on the 4th of March in the United Kingdom. And interestingly enough, that same month it was released with Beyond Two Souls, which is also part of the Quantic Dream collection. It was included on PlayStation Plus for the month of July 2018, so anybody who is the subscriber to the network would have been able to access it for free and keep it for good, which was astonishing. I mean, I applaud PlayStation Plus network for doing so already for a number of months and providing such top quality games to the subscribers. So if you have not subscribed to PlayStation Plus, I would most highly recommend it. And also, if you are on it, you'll be able to get a trial period for PlayStation Now, which is a major forum for which you can play the games instantly. You simply download and play the game as you go along. Really absolutely extraordinary forums, and most highly recommended to everyone. Nothing better than being able to access the game instantly and then engage with the community and basically play, share, interact on social networking and everything else. We see it as the future of the gaming, but we'll have to see how things unravel. So in addition to that, because the game was very successful, sold many copies, they were considering both a section that would be seen as a prequel, and they were working on the Heavy Rain Chronicles. So initially they planned it as a downloadable content with multiple scenes, but they produced only one featuring Madison Page, and she was voiced by a different actress than in the game at that stage, and it was called Taxidermist. So a couple of years later, They showcased it at E3 of 2008. The rest were cancelled due to the PlayStation Move Edition, which was released in October 2010, and this edition also included the taxidermist with 3 dynamic themes, the soundtrack, and 9 making of videos. Also, the slipcase collector's edition did have the same content as the Move Edition, excluding 2 themes and making of videos, and obviously the Move support. In a moment, we'll just focus at the reception of the game, the way the players and the critics worldwide received Heavy Rain on its release. But before then, we'll take a short break. Welcome back. We are discussing Heavy Rain, one of the best adventure games of the last decade, released by Quantic Dreams and directed by David Cage. We've looked at the way this game was conceived, the way the team worked on it, the way they developed everything together with Microsoft and Sony, and we looked at the period during its release. So now we'll consider how this game was received. Heavy Rain was included in the book called 1001 Video Games You Must Play Before You Die, and I would say the inclusion was absolutely justified. This was a terrific adventure game, literally raising the bar for the industry, and being one of the most exciting adventure games that anyone would have played. A lot of people complained that it was just the PlayStation exclusive, but nevertheless, obviously, this would have drawn many new players to the PlayStation, and the way the entire controls were set up was specifically focusing on the PlayStation controller. So one way or the other, definitely well-deserved inclusion in 1001 Video Games You Must Play Before You Die. Out of a focus group of 70, it was determined that none had assessed who the killer was before the game revealed it. So you had lots of different critics looking at it and considering, ins and outs of the game. The overall reception was very, very good. Most online portals for gaming indicated that the game would have been 9 out of 10, 8 out of 10 or so, so very, very high rankings, without getting into sort of separate critics and their views on the game. I'd say that they simply embraced the idea that you can have a major adventure game that will have the facility to get replayed up to 17 times with a different outcome, and that you will never get bored whilst you play it. So let's have a look at the sales of the game. The game debuted in Japan in 6th place out of 10, selling 27,000 units, and it topped the UK charts the same week. The UK, it had a very, very good reception. It was the 10th best-selling retail game of February, with over 219,000, during that February of 2006. 2 months later, it had passed 1 million sales, outperforming Cage's pre-release estimate of 200,000 to 300,000. So, they were expecting for the bar to be raised during that period, and particularly compared to Fahrenheit. But evidently, the game and the sales exceeded all of their expectations. It outsold all Xbox 360 games in Europe during the first 15 weeks of 2010, and ranking it number 10 in console software sales in that region. So it was absolutely astonishing. By August 2013, the game had sold 3 million copies, which rose to 4.5 million in 2017 and 5.3 in 2018 in collective sales across both platforms. It is one of the best-selling PlayStation 3 video games of all times, and Sony, that embraced the game during that troubling period, did profit over 100 million euros from it. So it was definitely a very, very good investment, and a game that people will be obviously remembering and playing for many, many, many years. Because of its success, they considered for this game to be turned into a motion picture. And on 15th of May 2006, the New Line Cinema optioned the rights to make Heavy Rain into a film, just after the reveal of Heavy Rain, the casting. They really liked the engine, and when you are accessing the bonus section on the game, you'll be able to see as to why. It is quite extraordinary. It's very similar to the usual film auditions, but the twist there is that you get this perfect engine that is displaying the character fully animated, and one moment you see them as animated character in the actual location where the part of this game is shot, and the next minute you get green screen inclusions, insertions, and they are purely in the game, and they're absolutely perfectly blending with the narrative. So that was very appealing to the guys from the film studios, and they tried to kind of make this project take off, but there were many problems, and some of the ideas were auctioned off to Unique Features, and that was a production company formed by two former New Line executives, Bob Shea and Michael Lynn. They purchased the film rights with their own funds, despite having a first look deal, which was in place for Warner Brothers, didn't really take off. And David Milch, writer for the NYPD Blue and Deadwood, was also slated to adapt it under the title Rain. So we have to see. I mean, it may well be that in the future there could be further development. But really, to summarize at the end, once you get into the game, you will be drawn into that very dark and deadly world of this nameless city, which we believe is Philadelphia, with many characters and with great capacity for replayability, and really a way through which you will get into the mindset of various protagonists. And that's quite similar to what we've had in Mass Effect, for instance, a completely different developer, BioWare, and everything different. But it's one of those games where you really begin to feel for one of the characters, and you really worry about what is to happen next, and you really don't want them to die. You don't want them to get into those situations where the life will be in danger. I'll give you a brief description of what happened to me when I played it for the first time, and it really, really drove me mad, because you have this FBI character who is, polished but very troubling, and he has a particularly interesting gadget that is enabling you to access bits and pieces on the crime scene that nobody else can see. And halfway through the game, he's obviously a very important character, when it comes to resolving the crime, and he was brought in to develop psychological profiling, to examine the crime scenes and everything else. And he gets into this garage, and he's chasing one of the known criminals, who basically tricks him, and if you're not careful enough, whilst the FBI agent is in the car trying to get away from this criminal, he gets killed and basically turned into mincemeat. The trouble with the sequence is that you have it's a slight problem with controls, and I had a difficulty in getting him quickly out of the vehicle. I mean, he got out halfway, but then he couldn't really liberate himself from the strap that was holding him. And basically, I lost one of the key characters halfway through the game, which evidently turned my ending into something that nobody wanted to see. and that was extremely frustrating. And obviously I couldn't tell what the ending was going to be like, but I knew that once one of my main characters was killed off so early, there's going to be trouble. So I hope you enjoyed this brief introduction, and we will start playing the game very, very shortly, and hope you'll join me in this journey of discovering how Origami Killer was brought to book. And I really hope to see you in my future broadcasts as we continue to explore Heavy Rain and its protagonists. Thank you very much for coming. Hope to see you soon. Take care.